Hey everyone, welcome back to DTVC Extra. This episode we're going to be looking at Iron Man 3 and Thor Dark World. So we're going to be getting into Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 2. And then, usually when I do these openings, right, I talk about what's coming up for the blog, the site, more podcasts. But I figured probably the best thing is to talk about what's coming up for this iteration of the podcast, the DTVC Extra. I think it's a very brief hiatus, right? We only went like a week or so without me doing an episode. I think obviously now with the podcast going in a weekly format with guests, right? It was a matter of, would there be a place for the DTVC Extra? Because the only reason why I invented it in the first place, right, was to make my podcast weekly, but not have to worry about booking weekly guests. And so then there was a sense of, okay, do I still need the DTVC Extra? And I kind of like the idea of having content twice a week, but maybe not every week, So I'm thinking like every other Thursday. That's the plan for right now. And what it's going to look like every other Thursday. I mean, obviously probably the big question is just going to be Matt talking about comic book movies every week, right? Because I'm kind of going back to back with Marvel Cinematic Universe. No, that's definitely not the case. I'm going to definitely get this Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 2 out of my system. And then I was actually kind of inspired by some of the talk around Madam Web to look at Pam Grier the next time around for the next set. And so there's a set for movies from the 70s that are on Pluto. So I could watch them for free on Pluto. I mean, yes, Pluto is not great with commercials, but, be able to watch them. And kind of the idea there with that was that, just sort of, Madam Web. Obviously, I mean, people, as we're listening to this right now, the buzz out there is that it might be another Catwoman, right? It might be that level of bad for a comic book movie. And there was a thought in my head. I was like, well, is it? It seems like it's disproportionately female-led comic book movies that seem to do this badly. And as I thought back to it, maybe that's not quite the case. But right, you think of some of the ones. I mean, obviously, Catwoman is stands up there as like one of the absolute greats, right? Trying to think of the first one, and the first one that comes to mind for me is Supergirl, right, from the '80s, and that was kind of part of that. They didn't call them universes back then, right? It was almost like kind of a spin-off of the Superman movies that were big at that time. And of course what happened was we had Superman 3 that really kind of diminished the franchise some, and Supergirl comes out among that, and it didn't do so hot. Then what's interesting, right, is then the two big ones kind of take a break from that, Marvel and DC. Of course, Marvel really wasn't doing anything anyway, but we get Tank Girl and Barbed Wire, and those are ones like, and Barbed Wire, was given a Razzie. People really don't like Tank Girl, which Tank Girl is like one of my favorite comic book movies, but I know a lot of people don't like it. And even the director said she wished she could have had that one back. So that's an interesting one there where I really like it, but nobody else does. But then you get into Elektra, you get into Catwoman. And then, you get the good ones, right? You get Captain Marvel, which was a really good one. I think Wonder Woman did well. The interesting thing about Captain Marvel, the first Captain Marvel movie, there's a woman who was writing the books at the time, who she kind of gave some advice on them making Captain Marvel. And she said, you should make it so that Captain Marvel is kind of a mix of both Captain America and Iron Man. And she was saying how in a lot of cases, the hero is usually like a combination of two other characters that are in the series or in the show or in the movie. And so that was the idea, and that's kind of what we get, right? Which is a really winning combination that worked really well. I mean, so much of that movie just worked really well. So I mean, part of it in my head, I was thinking that it's not so much that it's that ones that are head by that are helmed by women, or that have women in the lead, or women leading characters, I should say. It's not that they're disproportionately bad. I mean, I think one is that the resources that are put into them are not always the best. I think Elektra and Catwoman can definitely be, especially Elektra. I mean, they rushed that one. The writing was all over the place. But anyway, as I was kind of thinking about this, I was like, well, when was it done right? And of course, the first thing that came to mind was Pam Grier in the 70s, right? I mean, Pam Grier wrote the blueprint on not just having female-led action movies, but just action movies in general. So that's obviously, an obvious one there. And then I was like, well, maybe I should watch some before this episode. I started looking and I saw, oh, look at all of these great movies of hers on Pluto. I mean, Friday Foster, Coffee, they're all there. All of her great stuff is there. So I was like, oh, I think there's like 6 of them that I could do. So that's probably what I'll do for the next time around. So we'll finish up Marvel Cinematic Universe, and then we'll Phase 2, and then do these Pam Grier movies. The other thing too is that I'm not sure too if it's all just going to be series of me looking at a franchise or a collection of movies. I might use this DTVC Extra for when things suddenly happen in the DTV world. News suddenly breaks. You think about a couple weeks ago, Carl Weathers passed away, right? I mean, maybe doing a 20-minute, 30-minute solo pod on Carl Weathers and kind of what he meant for me growing up watching action movies, what I feel like he means overall for the action genre. That might be a place for that, right? Or when Albert Pyun passed away, I mean, I put a big post on my Facebook page. Maybe that's a place for something like that. So that's another idea that I have there. In terms of the every other week format, I mean, I think I still want to do indie flicks on the other Thursdays, so that I still want to kind of have those there. And then what else I would do? I mean, maybe more letterbox lists. I mean, there's a lot of different things that I can do with Thursdays. But I just wanted more content, right? That's a big piece of it. The other thing is whether or not it's going to always be on Thursday, right? Right now, Thursday is the date that I've kind of picked for that. But one thing I want to look at is I want to make sure that because it's going to be 2 days after the normal podcast on Tuesdays, I want to make sure that that this DTVC Extra doesn't step on the main podcast. A big reason for that is just that my guests, when I have guests on the main podcast, they're usually have something that they are plugging or something that they are that they want out there, they want people to know about, and it's part of, yes, part of it is, being on with me, and, we have a great conversation and all that. That's definitely part of it. But another part of it is getting the word out about, their blog, their podcast, the book they have coming out, the movie that they're working on, the Indiegogo that they're working on for the movie, music albums, anything like that people are doing. And so I don't want this to be taking away streams from that. And I think the concern that I might have is that, like, okay, I know a lot of people listen to the podcast on the weekend. So I release on a Tuesday. They don't get around to listening to it till the weekend. I know that the streaming numbers go up on the weekends. And is it possible that they see the DTVC Extra thing first and then don't bother with either of them because they don't know that they're both there? So that's one thing I'm going to keep an eye on. If that's the case, maybe I start posting this on weekends after people have listened to the main podcast. So, a lot of it is still up in the air. So it's kind of uncharted water here, but we'll see. We'll kind of see how it goes here by doing this one every other week. Again, the other thing too, of course, with it being the podcast piece, is work. Right, seeing how work goes. Today was kind of a busier day for work, and so I was able to find some time to record. I mean, with these DTVC Extras, they're a little bit easier because it's like 20 to 30 minute segments, so it's not quite so bad. And really, recording with a guest is not that hard either. It's watching the movie is maybe the longest part, but actually recording the podcast is a lot faster than doing blog posts. That's what I've discovered as I've kind of been between the two of them, and especially when I was sick with COVID, I found it was a lot easier for me to do a 2.5 hour podcast than it was for me to write a blog post. So they do take a little bit less work as well. But we'll see. This is kind of all going to be up in the air. And of course, I'm always keen to have feedback from people on things that they kind of either if they think I should just scrap it all together, or ideas that they think I could things I could talk about, that kind of thing. I think one of the things definitely there might be a bit of comic book fatigue. I'm hoping not. I'm hoping not that as I'm revisiting these movies that came out a little while ago, that it won't be comic book fatigue. I think one of the things with the Madam Web situation is people are talking about that as being a form of like comic book fatigue, and that's part of the reason why people are not happy with the movie. And I think one person even said it's the end of the comic book movie renaissance, right? And then at the same time, right, we had the word that Deadpool was coming out, Deadpool and Wolverine, which kind of broke YouTube. I don't know if it broke YouTube. It definitely broke IMDb. I know when I tried to log into IMDb during the Super Bowl, I couldn't for a little bit. But I mean, huge amount of streams of people wanting to watch that trailer, and people were talking about like, is that going to save the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Other people saying, well, that's kind of dismissive of some of the stuff that came out last year. All those debates that sort of happen, and I try not to get involved with those debates. So it is kind of fun too. It's kind of fun to like page through and see like why people angry about the Snyder cut or this or that kind of thing. But anyway, and so while there is fatigue, I think maybe coming. I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of curious about this Madam Web movie now. Like I've been hearing so many things about it. I'm kind of curious to see it and see what it looks like in the theater. But I think it is kind of fun to go back to some of these older ones. And in my case, I hadn't seen them all before. But even I'm starting to get fatigued, right? By watching them all again, I'm getting a little fatigued. And I think that's why I'm like, oh man, I started this thing. All right, I'm going to finish it off. I've got 4 more movies, right? 2 more episodes to do, and then I can get into Pam Grier. But there was a part of me that wanted to just scrap it all together and just jump right into Pam Grier. And I was like, I already teased that I was going to talk about MCU Phase 2. So we'll just kind of do that and have that done. But, we'll kind of see what happens from there. So with me not having seen Madam Web, there isn't much, of course, I can say about it. Though it does look interesting. Like I always thought it's supposed to be about like Spider Women, who are like kind of supporting characters to Spider-Man. I always thought that Spider-Woman was Jessica Drew. That was the one that I understood was Spider-Woman. I remember her on like Avengers West Coast when I was collecting comics. None of the characters in this movie are named Jessica Drew, so I'm assuming that there are other characters that came well after I collected the comics. But the interesting thing, of course, the star is Dakota Johnson, who is the daughter of Don Johnson and Melanie Griffith, and she was born in 1989, I believe, which one of my all-time favorite Miami Vice episodes is Hooker by Crook. It was in the 3rd season in 1987. It had Melanie Griffith, had George Takei, had Vanity. I think it was Vanity's first TV performance. Also had Captain Lou Albano. So all kinds of people in it. And this really fantastic scene at the end where they're on Sonny's yacht, Melanie Griffith and Don Johnson, and Holding Back the Years is playing, right? And you kind of hear that unmistakable opening. If you think of Holding Back the Years, it's kind of like boom, 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 and then there's like the strings. I don't know if I can imitate the strings of, but you hear that part coming in there, and then then Mick Hucknall's voice, of course, which is just absolutely amazing. But that scene was just so fantastic, and I wonder. I mean, I don't know if they played the music that we heard after. I don't know if they played it on set while the scenes were going. I doubt it, right? So they wouldn't have been in that scene there, but I do wonder because Don Johnson and Melanie Griffith were married in the late 70s or mid 70s, divorced. She was married to Stephen Bauer at the time, but then they got back together. They remarried, I believe, in '89. It's why we're not long, or maybe I don't know. It was around. It was again in the late '80s that they remarried. I do wonder if that episode brought them back together. It was the only thing they did together in that period of time between when they were married the first time and married the second time. So I love the idea of one of my favorite Miami Vice episodes giving us Dakota Johnson, who would later be in this Madam Web movie that could be another Catwoman. It's just, the idea of it is just so fantastic. The other thing that's just fascinating, I haven't seen any of these movies. So I haven't seen Venom, I haven't seen the second Venom, I haven't seen Morbius. But it's this fascinating concept where Sony, right, they essentially go into a deal with Marvel or with Disney to use Spider-Man in the MCU, right? But at the same time, they still wanted to kind of build their own universe, right? Because everybody was building universes. I mean, that's the thing, what happens after the Avengers is suddenly everybody wants their own shared universe because it seems like that's the way to do it. And this idea, right, of having a Spider-Man universe without Spider-Man is just fascinating, right? That's what you would do. Somebody compared it to Gotham, the TV series, which I remember watching that one. I was a fan of Gotham initially, and that's where it's sort of like before, when Batman's just a kid, and it's like Commissioner Gordon is in town, and all the villains are starting to kind of rise up in there. The thing I got sick of with Gotham, I stopped watching it, was just a matter of it was just all like gouging people's eyes out and cutting out their arms and doing all kinds of gross stuff like that, and it just got to be too much. And I was like, okay, I've seen enough of this before, so I've seen enough of this now. I'm turning it off. So that's why I didn't like Gotham. But for me, actually, what it really feels like is in the late '80s, early '90s. If anybody remembers this, DC Comics put out a trading card line, because that was a big thing, right? If you remember in the early '90s, you had trading cards for everything, right? But I remember comic book ones in particular. Marvel had some really great ones. I used to collect the Marvel trading cards. They'd have these holograms and everything. They were really cool. I remember my grandfather visited one time and we went to this card store, and he just bought me a box of the Marvel ones, and I thought that was the greatest thing ever. I remember my dad used to give me a box of baseball cards, and I'd open those, but I just couldn't believe he did that. And I found out later he probably didn't have the money to do that. He just was, doing it anyway. But I just remember like opening the cards and just going through them. But DC, wanted their own line. The problem was that DC had licensed the Batman and the Bat properties to another company. I think it was like Topps or something like that. And so when they did their own card line, they couldn't use Batman for it, so they had to use everybody else, right? So you'd have like, I remember they had like Superman, Shazam, Green Lantern, all of those, but they didn't have Batman. That's kind of what I think of this as. It's like Spider-Man's been licensed to something else, so they can't use him, but they can use all the other people in Spider-Man for this Spider universe that they're trying to do. And it's just a fascinating concept, and this one might be the most fascinating out of all of them. It makes me want to see it even more, right? It just like I think the idea of being able to see a movie like this in the theater. I'm trying to think of the worst movie that I saw in the theater. I know I saw the Dana Carvey movie. What was that one called? Master of Disguise. And I think my friend and I actually thought it was funny. We actually kind of enjoyed it, but I saw that one in the theater. That might have been the worst movie, like, in terms of like just, objectively bad movie. That might have been the worst one that I ever saw in the theater. I was trying to think of anything else that I that would even kind of compare with that. I mean, my friend and I did not like the movie Wolf, the Jack Nicholson movie, and I remember we were like openly heckling it, and of course it annoyed other people in the theater, as you can imagine. I remember that friend, it was our first time hanging out. So his last name was Petrowski. My name's Poirier. And so we were sitting together in French class, and we just said, hit it off. And he mentioned, he's like, "Hey, you want to go see that movie Wolf?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's go check that out." And we were getting in the car. His mom picked me up, and I was with him in the car. And he opens up his jacket and showed a wolf mask, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna put this wolf mask on and freak people out in the theater." And I was like, "Oh, this is excellent," And so we're there, and this woman and her daughter sitting in front of us, and they were kind of annoyed because again, we're young teenage kids, we're being a pain in the ass, and so he puts the mask on, and the whole plan was that he was gonna ask like if they had the time, and if they screamed, I was supposed to be like Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men and be like, "You can't handle the truth." That was the idea. But when he did it, when he's like, "Excuse me, do you have the time?" They just scowled at him. They just gave him this death stare. And he's like, "Okay, I'm just gonna sit down and take the mask off now." But anyways, we did not like Wolf. But I don't think that was the same thing. I mean, yeah, Master of Disguise is probably it. So I'd be curious to see if this movie is worse than Master of Disguise, if it's really that bad. The other thing I've been reading about it is that it uses dialogue for plot exposition, right? So it's like, people just rattle off a whole bunch of stuff to explain something that happened in the past. And when I think of that being used as a plot device, I think of Andy Sedaris films, right? And the whole point of that was, well, Andy Sedaris is going to have, whatever, like Lisa London say, "Oh, I'm an agent who also runs a restaurant, and it's kind of difficult, but I like doing it," and that's like just her line there, and like the whole point is like these characters give plot exposition in their dialogue because Andy Sedaris wants to save as much time as possible for, people being shot, things blowing up, and women getting naked, right? That's the whole point of it. And so that's the thing, right? You can forgive that kind of shoddiness if there's a sort of payoff to it. And I do think I think with this movie, the reason why people are so upset about it is that there's no payoff. Not saying payoff in the sense that people need to be naked or anything like that, right? I'm saying payoff in the sense that like, you don't actually get superheroes, I guess, until the very end, which I guess is kind of a, it's a kind of a sautéed and raw sauce concept. And so there's this sense of almost like cinematic anarchy now. That's like initially I was reading about the reviews and people were just crushing it. And then it's kind of flipped a little bit that there's this sense of cinematic anarchy where it's like, I want to see this thing on the screen and see if it's really as bad as everybody's saying it is. And if it is, can I enjoy it, right? Can I have fun with it for the badness, right? Can it be like a riff tracks kind of thing? So I'm fascinated. And I am, my sister and brother-in-law, they got me a gift card, Fandango gift card. So I could go see it with really little to no, what do I say? No expense on my part, right? No risk involved. So I am curious about it. But it is interesting, like we were talking in previous episodes about how Thor was not really a big star, or Iron Man even to itself was not a big star. And it's like, okay, could you make movies off of lesser known characters, right? Blade, right? We think of Blade in the late 90s, early 2000s. They were able to make that. Well, yes, you can make a character, you can make a movie around a character that's not as big, but the movie has got to be somehow larger than life, right? Like Iron Man was larger than life, or Blade, right? I mean, Wesley Snipes is larger than life, right? And I don't know that Dakota Johnson, I know she was in like the 50 Shades of Grey movies, but I haven't seen those yet either. But I don't think she has the presence that a Wesley Snipes has, does she? And then I guess who would the woman be that you'd get that would have that presence, right? That would really just like bang it out of the park. And so then I would have to think of who. I mean, obviously, I mean, I think of like major actresses. Of course, I'm a little bit behind. I think of like Meryl Streep, someone like that. But yeah, I mean, well, you think of like the Deadpool movies, right? Where you have Zazie Betts, right, playing Domino. I mean, she was a big enough kind of presence, right, that I think she could be in something like this and lead the movie. I mean, you think about Jennifer Garner, right? I mean, she had that kind of presence in Elektra. It's just the movie itself fell flat. So it's not just about the presence, right? It's more than that too. But yeah, I'm extremely curious to kind of see. I mean, I'm curious to see kind of what the Deadpool movie is like this year. I mean, this is an interesting year anyway for comic book movies, right? Because you've just got you've got Deadpool, you've got the Joker sequel, and then you've got 3 of these like Sony Spider-Man universe movies, right? You've got this one who just this Madam Web. You've got another Venom movie, and then you've got Kraven, which I'm curious to see what they even do with Kraven because he's a bad guy. I mean, and that's I guess that's another piece of it, right? Is this weird thing where Venom was a bad guy. He was kind of like a mix, good and bad, but he was a bad guy, and they're turning him into a good guy. Are they going to turn Kraven into a good guy too? And that's so it's all really really fascinating stuff, and I am kind of curious. I mean, I don't know if I want to go back and watch those other ones like Venom and I mean Morbius. I don't know if I can handle Morbius, and I kind of think part of the reason Morbius is bad. I don't think as many people like Jared Leto as people think like Jared Leto. I know for me, I'm born in the late '70s. I know my age cohort within Gen X. There's kind of a split where people wanted to split us between the Jake Ryan for the older ones, and then Jordan Catalano, Jared Leto's character from My So-Called Life as the younger ones. I hated that character, and I was not a fan of him either. Like, he didn't do anything for me. I mean, I couldn't watch that show because of his character. He just seemed like a complete oaf. And so that idea that, like, Jared Leto, right, I don't know. Like, I mean, I don't necessarily care much for his Joker either in the Suicide Squad movie or the Birds of Prey movie or whatever. So I think that's the other piece of it, right? Is that I think there's people that think Jared Leto is better than he really is, but then other people are kind of like, do I really need to watch Jared Leto? I don't, I'm sure there are enough people my age that were scarred enough by My So-Called Life that they're not going to bother with that kind of thing. So I don't know that I necessarily need to put myself through all of that. I think if I'm going to put myself through anything, Madam Web sounds like the one to put myself through. And I think, I almost feel like I should watch Catwoman and Elektra. I feel like bad putting Elektra in there because Jennifer Garner really did a good job with that movie, but it was so sauteed in wrong sauce. Yeah, and I mean, I'm trying to think of other bad comic book movies that kind of belong in that realm. I mean, obviously, like Morbius, when I was looking at the list of ones that like fans didn't like, Morbius was one, and another one that they didn't like was Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance, which maybe that tells you that I might actually like this Madam Web movie because I loved Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance, which again, if you want to listen to the podcast Mitch and I just dropped 2 days ago, so go back in there into the archives, 145. It should be right below this one on your podcast. When you look at all the episodes that we've got. Check that one out because we give that one a really good once over, and that was just a lot of fun. So maybe I'll actually like this movie. You never know. So anyway, that's probably good enough for us to wrap this here. So why don't we have John play our theme song? We'll use the same theme song. I think we'll keep using the same theme song here. I'll have John from Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures playing our theme song, and then when we come back, we will talk about Iron Man 3. All right, we are back, and we are going to look at Iron Man 3. Before we do, one of the things I wanted to kind of circle back to from when I did the Phase One episodes. Back then, when I did the Iron Man, the first Iron Man, I kind of did a history of comic book movies, and I was mostly trying to focus on Marvel with some DC mixed in. Mostly because Marvel, I was focusing on Marvel because it's Marvel Cinematic Universe, but then also DC was the big player at that time. But one of the things I left out were some of the sort of, I don't want to say indies, but you had some Image and Dark Horse productions in there that actually did, in some cases, did really well that I didn't mention. Probably could have. I think from the Dark Horse standpoint, you've got in '94 The Mask and Time Cop, right? Where The Mask, 23 million for the budget, does 351 million worldwide. I think it's mostly on the strength of its two stars, Jim Carrey and Cameron Diaz. But that was massive. That was huge. And of course, for The Mask, that was kind of like a limited run kind of thing. Same thing with Time Cop is the other one that was big in that year. And of course, Time Cop, I think a big part of that was Van Damme. That was, Van Damme was still riding that high, right? He had a few more years before Double Team, we start to see the dip come in there. But it makes almost 4 times its budget back, right? 27 million. So you're talking about movies that don't have big budgets that pull some big numbers. And then you've got the kind of the two female-led movies, Tank Girl and Barbed Wire. Neither did well. Tank Girl, 25 million, only made 4 million. I really like that movie again. I have to say that. Came out the day before my 16th birthday, actually. Came out on March 31st of 95. So I turned 16 on the 1st, which normally that's a big day here in America because it means you get your license, but I never got my license. So I still have not officially celebrated my 16th birthday, if you know what I mean. But anyway, and then Barbed Wire came out the next year. And so not long after my 17th birthday, actually, because it was May 3rd of 96. But anyway, that one ended up, I think it won Razzies in that kind of stuff. But at that time, right, in the mid 90s, you're in a period where we're kind of waiting for the next Batman movie. And, we were getting these other kind of comic book based movies like The Phantom, The Shadow, that kind of thing. But nobody was really making like the Superman, the Spider-Man, those kinds of movies, right? And it's almost like The Mask kind of falls in with that sort of more of that kind of the Shadow, Phantom kind of movie, but it's also kind of goofier and more offbeat. And of course, Jim Carrey just sells it completely. And then, Time Cop was just essentially just another Van Damme actioner, right? Like it's hard to distinguish it from, Hard Target or Death Warrant or, Sudden Death, right? Of course, the distinguisher for me with Sudden Death is it's hockey, and I love hockey. So anyway, but that's kind of it, They're kind of movies that kind of fit in with a niche at that time and really exploded based on some other factors. The other one I wanted to mention is Spawn, right, with Michael Jai White. That was the first movie first comic book movie helmed by an African American male, right? You technically, right, you get Blade a year later, right? But Michael Jai White was the first, right? So he's sort of the groundbreaker on that one. Didn't do as well as I think they would have wanted it to. It had a $45 million budget and kind of came in at just under a hair under 90 million. I haven't seen that one in forever. That one came out as I was going into my freshman year of college. Now that I think about it, it was like late 97. So yeah, I was just starting college then. But yeah, it was one that I remember when it came out. I remember Spawn at that time. And Spawn was a huge comic. I had kind of stopped collecting comics at that time, so it was a little bit late for me when it came out. But I think there was probably a place to remake that movie. I think that movie could have been done again. But I think it's hard also too to do a movie where the main character, the hero or whatever is like all scarred and stuff like that. Like it looks good in a comic book, but in the movie, Deadpool's had to navigate that a bit, and they've essentially kind of like lightened the scarredness of his face, if you notice, like especially when you see like the trailer, right, that just came out for the new Deadpool movie. His face isn't quite so scarred, right? It just kind of looks like he's just kind of got a lot of wrinkles, kind of looks like Prune Face, right, from Dick Tracy, another comic book one that kind of came out in that post-Batman period. But anyway, yeah, so it wasn't all Marvel DC, but the interesting thing about the projects that were being done by Dark Horse, Spawn's a little different, right? Because Spawn was a comic book that Todd McFarlane had been, was a monthly that he lasted for a long time. I think he stopped finally doing it, but I think he still sends out like maybe like one shots or things like that. But at that time, and it was still going. The other ones though, like Tank Girl, you talk about I think The Crow's in a similar situation to that, but Barbed Wire. These were all kind of like one-offs or like small series. Mask was another small series. Time Cop, I think, was like a 3-part or something like that, but a limited series. And what those things were, because they weren't legacy pieces, the way like Spider-Man was a legacy piece, especially Batman, especially Superman, Captain America. Those were kind of these generational properties that you really had to make sure you got right in a certain way. Whereas these other movies, I don't think there's as much pressure, and so they could be done well or done poorly, but it wasn't like you were risking too much other than the money, right? Whereas like if you get Spider-Man wrong, now you're in trouble because can you make another Spider-Man movie? That kind of thing. But it was an interesting element of that period in the 90s where you had the shift in Batman from Tim Burton to the Joel Schumacher films, and there was a little bit of fatigue coming with those movies. So I still love Batman and Robin. I think you just can't go wrong with George Clooney in a tux. That just, for me, just will always work. But that movie is just so bonkers. I think that's why I love it, which again is probably another sign that I probably would like Madam Web if I like Batman and Robin. But there was a space there because Marvel wasn't doing anything. DC wasn't doing anything beyond those Batman movies, and so then you had like these Dark Horse properties that and Image properties and other ones like Malibu, places like that people could grab these and they already had like the basics of the right. I mean, Stallone did Judge Dredd, right? Which I think Stallone would have wanted that had it been more successful. Stallone would have wanted that to be like one of his franchises, right? He's got his Rocky franchise, his Rambo franchise, now his Expendables franchise, though the Rocky one has been kind of taken from him, which is a real fascinating thing, again, because we talk about these extended universe concepts, right? Where everything, after what happened with the Avengers, everyone wants an extended universe. And I think Michael B. Jordan was talking about wanting a Creed verse, which everybody was like, what do you mean a Creed verse? It's a Rocky verse, right? Like Creed is another character in Rocky. Creed's not the star. Rocky was the star, right? But that's, anyway, I think someone would have wanted, you would have wanted Judge Dredd to be one of those, and the film just didn't work. And I mean, that was another thing too. When you think about things being adapted in the 90s, you had a lot of hits and misses, right? I mean, so you've got, on the one hand, you got The Mask that goes really well, and then you've got the Tank Girl that doesn't work out, right? Just like you've got Double Dragon that doesn't work. You've got Super Mario Brothers that doesn't work. Street Fighter, right? I mean, we're just talking about Time Cop with Van Damme that did really well, and then Street Fighter that didn't do so well. So there were all these adaptations, and it felt like it was almost like a hit or miss kind of thing. And it's really not until the Marvel Cinematic Universe that really get that consistency where they kind of they kind of put it together in a certain way. I mean, this is where I think it's a good segue as we get into Iron Man 3, because Iron Man 3, it was almost guaranteed to do $1 billion as long as they didn't mess with it too much, right? That was really the key, is they just needed to just deliver a solid movie, and it was probably going to do $1 billion because everybody was so excited after the Avengers movie that they had to watch Iron Man 3. Now, granted, at that time I hadn't seen Avengers, I hadn't seen Iron Man 3, so I wasn't excited to do any of it, right? So I wasn't doing any of these things, but a lot of people were, and one of the things I read in the trivia is that they had an original 3-hour cut of this, like a 3-hour and 10-minute cut, and they trimmed it down to 2 hours and 10 minutes. That's where you go wrong, right? That's where you get the flop, is when you try to do 3 hours for something like this, which, I mean, I say that people endured 3 hours of that new Batman movie and seem to think that was great. So maybe it's just me, right, with that kind of thing. But what I'm saying is they kind of went more straight ahead here with this and did a really great job. The other thing I really like what they do with this movie is, we just had Iron Man in the Avengers, right, where he's working with all these other superheroes. And in this movie, it's like they go through this really strong process of stripping him down, so that it's not just that he has nobody else, right? Because Don Cheadle's kind of there, but he kind of isn't. Pepper Potts is kind of there, but she isn't. So essentially, at one point, he's just completely isolated by himself, and his Iron Man suit isn't working either, right? And he's got to fix it. And it's a kind of a really cool idea. It's a almost kind of like, when we were talking about Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, when I had Mitch on the previous episode, and there's that point where Idris Elba, who's the monk, is able to take Ghost Rider's powers away from him, right? And so he loses the power, or kind of like we talked about with Superman 2, right, where he gives his power away in the Fortress of Solitude. It's a similar situation here, but it's because it's Iron Man. It's like a unique thing because it's like, another one I think it was I watched the Wolverine, and in the Wolverine, right, that Viper woman like puts some kind of virus on his heart, and it affects his healing power, right? So it's like kind of a mystical kind of thing. But with this, it was much more authentic, the way that they kind of took his power away from him, and he had to work just strictly on his brain and on his mind. But then there's that point at the kind of the end where he gets captured by the baddies, and he kind of gets his power back, right? And he uses his Iron Man powers to eventually win. But yeah, I mean, I'll give a quick synopsis here, just because, again, I think people have mostly seen these movies, so I don't know how much of a synopsis I really need to give. I think I was giving them in the previous ones just because I'm used to giving synopsises or synopsi. But I'll go quickly here. I mean, essentially with this one here, it's after the events of the Avengers. Robert Downey Jr. Is Iron Man, or as Tony Stark. He's having trouble adjusting to life after what happened with the Avengers, and he's just sort of putting himself into his work, right? He's just devoting himself entirely to his work, which is, of course, hurting his relationship with Pepper Potts. At the same time, in the late 90s, he had spurned this guy, played by Guy Pearce. It's like Killian Aldrich. He's this guy who, like, had created some, he was coming up with some technology, and there's a woman that he has a one-night stand with, played by Rebecca Hall, named Maya Hansen, who essentially was coming up with the technology to be able to regenerate limbs and cure, heal bodies, that kind of thing. And so this guy, Aldrich Killian, he ends up working with what we think is the Mandarin, played by Ben Kingsley, who's like doing these like terrorist attacks or something like that. And they end up like going to Tony Stark's house, blowing it up, and he's kind of on the run, and he finds himself in Tennessee, where there's some clues to what's going on here with this Aldrich Killian guy, and then it's kind of one of those things. He's got to repair his suit. Gwyneth Paltrow gets captured by them, so he's got to go save her. He's got to defeat this guy. The president gets captured. He's also got to save the president. It's kind of one of those things where he's got to kind of fix his Iron Man suit, but then also, all this time that he's been spent obsessed with working on his stuff, he's created all of these Iron Man suits, and they all kind of fly to his rescue. Calls it the House Party Protocol, which I know from the video game I play, Marvel Puzzle Quest, that because they had a character that was based off of this Iron Man. He had the move House Party Protocol. I don't know, it's one, because there's like multiple Iron Man in the movie. But anyway, and that's kind of it. But I think that idea that one of the things, there's a kid when he goes to Tennessee, there's a kid who's helping him out. And normally I can't stand kids in movies. Normally they just don't work for me at all. And in this case, I was okay with it. It worked. It's funny. Recently, I saw this post on, I don't know if it was on Twitter or something, but in Arlington, Massachusetts, the people there, the community there, they wanted to charge local daycares for using the parks. So essentially make them pay a fee of like $5,000 or something like that a year to be able to use the parks. And people were up in arms about it, right? And of course, for me, I hear that about Arlington, Mass, and I think, well, Brookline was probably upset that they didn't think of it first, right? Because that's a very Brookline thing anyway. If you're ever in some of those suburbs of Boston, they are some real fascinating places to be. But anyway, but I was seeing like through the post there, and somebody was saying how there was a PBS in Boston, WGBH, I think it was, or something like that. They were doing either a panel discussion or something. They were talking about this kind of thing, about how they wish there were restaurants that were adults only, and they hate when parents bring their kids into restaurants and all the trouble it causes. And these people were saying it like, how horrible it was that they were having this conversation. And I was kind of like, no, I kind of dig that. But for me, it's not so much that I hate the kids, right? I think it's the adults that don't take care of the kids that make it so difficult. And I totally get that, like, if you're a parent, your kid's screaming, you've probably gotten so desensitized to your kids screaming. Just like me here in Philadelphia, I'm so desensitized to like sirens and people yelling and fighting, and not quite gunshots yet, but all the rest of it I'm pretty desensitized to, so that when I go to like, New England, the thing that freaks me out is I'm suddenly like, I'm hearing all the rain on the trees and stuff like that. I'm not used to hearing that anymore. So you're probably desensitized to it. You don't think that your kid's screaming at the top of their lungs in the restaurant is such a big deal. But for all of us that don't have kids, it's a big deal. Or when your kid's spitting their food out, because that's what they do at home and they think it's not a big deal. It's one of those realities, just kind of as an aside here, of just what our human life is now compared to what it was, hundreds of thousands of years ago when we were first evolving as human beings, right? For the most part, we all lived in these sort of band societies where, parents and kids could all be together, and it wasn't really a big deal if anybody was spitting or anything like that. We didn't have restaurants, right? It's really, the restaurant is the bug in the system, right? Not the kid that you're bringing to the restaurant. The kid is just behaving the way the kid should. So it was kind of like in the mornings here. I'm sure any parent who has to get their kids to school probably knows exactly what I'm talking about here, but we have a charter school near us, and so I'm always in the morning just hearing the commotion of parents having, because there's no school buses for some reason here in Philadelphia, or if there are, parents don't use them. So it's just this commotion of parents like finding places to park, running their kids to the school, all of that. And at least once a morning, there's one child who has a meltdown, right? There's just the one that's just screaming their head off, they just can't handle it. And the reality is that the child who's having the meltdown and screaming their head off, they're the one having the proper reaction to the situation, right? It's the rest of us who have been so beaten down and have like this concept of like, oh, I've got to get up in the morning and work, right? And I've got to go do all this stuff because that's how the world works and it makes sense. The child is being like, no, why are we doing this? This is stupid. Like, I should be home sleeping. Why am I going to this school? Why am I going to this place? I'm a human being. Like, you're turning me into an automaton. So it's like that last little bit of rebellion. So I have trouble with it at the restaurant when I'm trying to eat and the child's screaming at the top of their lungs. Or, if I'm at a sporting event, there was a kid at a sporting event who was sitting behind me who just decided to spit his water out. And the parents were not all that apologetic. They're like, oh sorry. They didn't seem to care. Like, that kind of thing can get to me. But, in the morning when I hear a kid screaming and losing their mind, I'm kind of just thinking like, yeah, I hear you. Unfortunately, the system's going to beat it out of you. And in 20 years, you're going to be your parents driving an SUV with your kids to another charter school somewhere. And you're going to be dealing with your kid having a meltdown. You don't even remember that you had this meltdown. You're going to completely forget it. It's never going to exist in your brain. And your parents will forget it because you've had so many other meltdowns. But, that's the reality. But anyway, completely off topic there. Me just kind of doing my, my rant about our modern society. But yes, I think when I hear those kids screaming in the morning, I hear them rebellion, and I hear that last bit of rebellion, and I think, oh, yes, scream away, because you're not going to have many more opportunities to do that. Excuse me. Anyway, back to Iron Man 3. And I don't have much more on this one, because I think the thing about this one is that beyond the fact that I really like the way that they handled, the idea of taking away his power the way that they did in a non-mystical way, but rather in a more technical way, also a mental way. He's having panic attacks. Mentally he's sort of breaking down as Iron Man, and it's a real fascinating thing to even like just think about, right? Because you don't really have, when you think of Superman wanting to have his powers taken away, there isn't as much focus on the mental aspect of it. It's just he doesn't want to be Superman anymore, right? And he wants to lose his power, so he goes to the Fortress of Solitude. But they really focus on the sort of crisis of identity. And it really kind of comes home at the end when you get these 42 different Iron Man suits that come to the rescue. And, and he ends up blowing them all up, too, right? At the very end. I guess I'm giving away something there. But he blows them all up because it's almost like this sense of like, okay, I'm breaking away from that. I've kind of created all of these characters, all of these other versions of me. I'm going to blow them all up and just kind of focus on myself. And so I really liked those elements there. But again, knowing that they just made over $1 billion with Avengers, knowing that they had just ripped the comic book movie mantle away from DC, and I just took it so firmly away from them, taking it from Fox as well, like that they were the dominant movie kings at this point. They just had to show up and do something good. And I like the fact that they played it safe in other areas, right? Where we just get your normal solid action set pieces. And then they embedded the nicer pieces kind of a little bit further underneath the I don't know if they're under the surface so much, but they're embedded within the story. So we don't get any boring parts. We don't get any senseless exposition or anything like that. But at the same time, we get this character study piece here. I think for this being the last Iron Man movie, right? Now, of course, Tony Stark is in all of those movies, so many of the movies up until we get to Avengers Endgame where they kill his character off, which I totally get it. Him playing, essentially he was playing the part for 10 years. So he played it way more than he needed to. So I think it was time for him to hang it up. I'm sure he was tired of it at that point. But with this being the last Iron Man-led movie, at least for the, I don't think there's any plans to have another one as far as I know. I think this was a really good way to send it out. So one of the things I thought about is just in terms of like how sort of movie series work, right? Because this is a unique one in the sense that it is its own standalone movie, right? But it is also part of a bigger network of films. So it's like this is the third Iron Man movie, but it's the seventh Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, the first movie in Marvel Phase 1. So it kind of has a lot of different hats that it wears, right? But just thinking in terms of the three Iron Man movies, I would think, the sequels can kind of work in different ways, right? That like sometimes you have a situation where there's a step down from each of them, right? So the first one's good, second one's pretty good, third one's not so good. I think that kind of works here, where I really like I like the first one best, second one second best, and this one third best. But I don't think there's such a drop off between them, right? That it's like think of it as a stairway. It's kind of like a nice graded stairway that's helps for people that are shorter, so they can go up the stairs and don't have to really step so much, right? It's not a really steep decline between the movies. It's interesting thinking about how sequels work, because I think there are some movies where the sequel is either better or close, as good as the first one. Like I think Godfather. I know some people think the second Godfather is better than the first one. For me, I think it's as good. Empire. I think I like Empire better than the first one, than Star Wars. I'm going to call it Star Wars instead of A New Hope. I think I like it better than Star Wars, but I think if I'm comparing them, I think they're as good as each other, right? House Party 2, right, for sure, is as good as the first House Party. I mean, I think of the Pajama Jammy Jam was a really great ending, but I think that the house party in the first movie is fantastic too, with the dancing scene and all of that stuff. Sequels, a lot of times it's interesting how those work. I mean, you think of the Spider-Man movies, again, I think that's a kind of a clear delineation. Blade, I think the second Blade is better than the first one. But then the third one, there seems to be a real drop-off there, right, when you go to that one. So I think this one here, to be consistent and have three really solid movies here, I think is really good. And I think the fact that they quit while they were ahead, I thought was really a good idea as well, because I think they could have dragged this on and kept making these movies. And I don't know if part of that was that they just wanted to have Tony Stark and Robert Downey Jr. in other movies to sell the other movies down the road. That kind of makes sense, right? If you think about it, if you put him in as many of these movies as possible, which I think he has the record. It was either him or Hugh Jackman have the record for playing a character in the most movies. Going back to Hugh Jackman, right? He has a movie come out this year. They kind of do they have a do-over on Wolverine, right? So we have the Wolverine instead of X-Men Origins Wolverine. It's a movie that takes place after the third X-Men movie. I really liked that movie. I thought it was really good. I think you could put it as good as this movie. I think this movie covers a lot of more territory in a lot more fun ways, in a lot deeper ways than the Wolverine does. But I liked it. I mean, Man of Steel also comes out this year. That's kind of DC's attempt to kind of get back into things, and they're kind of starting their own cinematic universe at that time. And I think they'd even thought about teasing some of those elements in that movie. I think as a reboot of the Superman franchise, knowing that you probably had the greatest superhero movie of all time in Superman that you were rebooting from, I thought the fact that they went in a completely different direction from that movie, where they almost kind of made it a combination of 1 and 2 together. And what I also liked about the way that they did a combination of 1 and 2 together was that you had his adopted dad, played by Kevin Costner, who's telling his son not to use his power. So instead of going to the Fortress of Solitude and having his power removed, he's not using his power on purpose due to what his dad's telling him, right? And so it's almost like instead of going to the Fortress of Solitude, losing his power, and then not being able to save his dad in the tornado, his dad is saying, no, don't save me in the tornado because I don't want people to know about your power. So I thought that was a really interesting take there. And I also really like Michael Shannon as Zod. That was really good. So, some good movies that come out this year. And I think Iron Man 3, it didn't have to be the best out of the comic book movies to earn the most. I think it had so much momentum coming from Avengers that it didn't have to be that good, but it was. I mean, I think it was, for me, out of the 4 comic book movies that come out that year, and the next one we'll talk about, of course, will be Thor: Dark World. I think out of the movies that came out that year, I think, this one for me is the best out of that group, I think. It is interesting, though, right, that you get the Wolverine, right, where they kind of look at it as I wonder when they started even thinking about it. I mean, 4 years after X-Men Origins Wolverine, but I guess they had to get X-Men First Class out of their system first, and then they go, okay, now we're going to we're going to get this one in the can here. It's interesting as well to think about, I guess, with that X-Men Origins Wolverine one is that, Fox kind of sticks to one movie a year for the most part. I think they get I think in 2016, no, they just do one movie. I was going to say they did Fantastic Four, but that was 2015. So they kind of stick to the one movie a year or one movie every other year kind of thing. And that's one of the areas where I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe really starts to really kind of surge ahead, right? And I don't think surge ahead in the sense of like being outdoing 20th Century Fox, but they start doing 2 movies a year, right? So here in 2013 we get Iron Man and Thor: Dark World. 2014 we're going to get Captain America: Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy, and then we finish off the Phase 2 in 2015 with Avengers: Age of Ultron and Ant-Man. And they kind of just do 2 a year until they kind of get to a point where they're doing, more than 2 a year. They're doing, I think there's a point where they start doing 3 a year. And then we get to that kind of saturation point. So that's the other thing too, is that they start ramping it up here. And this is the point where Disney has kind of fully started to take over. So Iron Man 3 is the last movie that was originally meant to be distributed by Paramount, is now distributed by Disney. So it's like one of those things where the Paramount logo comes in at the beginning, and then at the end it says distributed by Walt Disney Pictures. That's the last one that's like that. So from here on, they're all Disney movies. And Disney saw where the money was, and they were like, okay, we're going to keep pumping these out. And I mean, when we talk about Thor here, we'll kind of see how they do as they keep pumping them out. So I think that's everything that I wanted to discuss on this one. I think that kind of covers everything. So what we'll do is we'll take a break, and then we will go into Thor: Dark World.
It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle.
All right, we are back, and we are going to finish up by talking about Thor: Dark World. I don't know how much I have to say about this movie because it's I will say this is one of the ones that I had originally seen. I saw it on cable not long after it came out. I think I only saw the second half of it as I watched this now, or maybe I just didn't remember the first half of it as much as I remember the second half. I think the thing that the sense that I came away from it was like, this is just more of the kind of the regular crap that we see from franchise big blockbuster kind of things, right? Like the story seemed to fit all of those points. I don't remember any of it making any sense, and watching it again this time, it still didn't make any sense with the sort of gravity anomaly kind of things where people could disappear and appear somewhere else, and none of that really made any sense, and it didn't seem like it needed to. I think watching it this time around, I was able to understand better why none of it needed to. Hiddleston is back as Loki, and he was really cool or really fun. Thor, Chris Hemsworth's Thor is kind of back, and he's like just, really, really charismatic and does really well. Natalie Portman is good in it, and Anthony Hopkins. It was kind of one of those things where it was like, just hit all your standard blockbuster spots and give people a movie that they want to go see in the theater, and it's going to do its thing. And it does. It makes, more than 3 times its budget. It comes out in the fall, so it's like, Iron Man 3 came out in May of 2013. This came out in November of 2013, so it kind of ended the year. And I think people were still kind of on the high from the Avengers at that point, and they wanted to see something else. This doesn't do as well. It does about half as well as Iron Man 3. So Iron Man 3 was like 1.2 billion. This was like not quite 650. So but I think for a Thor movie, that's like as good as you should expect, you know. And it I mean, it far outpaced its first movie. I mean, I think it made what its first movie made in like 19 days. So I mean, it definitely outkicked its covers there. I mean, you know, I think the other thing too from Disney's standpoint, and I think this is where I'm wondering. I mean, obviously this wasn't anywhere near the kind of financial flop that the Marvels was, but I think one of the things with this movie is that yes, you want to make, you definitely want to make money, right, on the movie, right? You want the movie to pull in and make something, right? Because these are companies, right? They're in it to make money, so that's the goal ultimately. But I also think too that one of the things this movie does is it just kind of furthers things along. So the money that this one doesn't make, I think, it kind of makes in building up to Avengers: Age of Ultron, right? I mean, I think the fact that Iron Man made 1.2 billion is more the outlier than Thor: Dark World only making over 600 million. When you get to Captain America: Winter Soldier, it's kind of the same. It's like a little over 700 million. Guardians of the Galaxy, 750 million. But they're all just kind of building up to what that Avengers movie was, and so they all make money, right? They all are pulling in a good amount of money, but they don't all have to be billion-dollar earners. And I think one of the things that Thor does here is it just kind of furthers things along and it keeps things moving. I'll try to give a quick synopsis. I don't really know how good the synopsis is going to be on this, just because it gets a kind of little all over the place. So I guess sometime in history there are these dark elves that wanted to make the whole world dark. Asgardians defeat them, kind of lock them away or whatever. There's this thing called the ether. It's like this red kind of like liquid kind of thing. It's funny because it's funny when you do red liquid kind of thing in this movie, it's not supposed to be goofy. But when you do red smoke in the last season of Highlander, it's goofy, right? I mean, I don't know how I'm supposed to not think that this was goofy too. But anyway, it looked like a Hawaiian Punch commercial or something, you know? But anyway, this ether thing, it goes into your system and I don't know, it's like some evil energy or something. And if this bad elf, Malekith, if he gets his hands on it, he'll destroy the universe, right? And so Thor realizes the only way he's really going to defeat him is if he pairs up with his buddy Loki, or his brother Loki, who has been in prison for all the crap that he pulled in Avengers. They get after it. They work with Jane. Jane's helping them as well, and Stellan Skarsgård's back, and they're creating some kind of like anomaly kind of thing. And I guess the whole thing is centered around the fact that at once every 5,000 years, the universe aligns, and that creates all these gravity kind of goofy things too. So anyway, once the gravity goofy things start to happen, it all kind of converges on Greenwich in England, and you have the big battle at the end. And fortunately, Thor and the powers of good, win. And then, of course, we get a teaser at the end of the trailer where we get our first Infinity Stone, which, for me, again, talking about my age being, I guess the Jordan Catalano generation or whatever. I mean, 6th, 7th grade, I was reading the Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War comics. So when I saw that they were using Infinity Stones, that was the one thing that was like, oh, this could be good. This could be interesting, right? And I think that did get me to watch Guardians of the Galaxy. Captain America: Winter Soldier, I remember seeing that one on cable, but then Guardians of the Galaxy, same thing. I think I picked that one up somewhere and watched it or something, but I think it was the Infinity Stone thing. Of course, didn't end up watching Avengers: Age of Ultron, so it's like I don't know what causes me to watch some movies and not watch others, but anyway, that was the case. But yeah, I mean, this movie is very different from, Thor itself was different from Iron Man, right? Because Iron Man was this game changer kind of thing, and Thor was just kind of a placeholder, but it does really well. I mean, it's a fun movie with Chris Hemsworth is really fun in his role. So you get a lot of really interesting things there. And this is kind of the same thing. It's kind of like, let's just keep moving this thing along. Let's just keep making money. Let's keep building these characters, building interest in these characters. One of the things I think it really does is that Loki, Tom Hiddleston's Loki, becomes an even bigger deal, right? And he ends up becoming the one that they start to kind of center everything around, which I think is kind of a cool thing, because he was really good. I mean, Chris Hemsworth also kind of really makes himself Thor, right? He's really, really Thor at this point. One of the things is he grew out his hair, I read in the trivia, to be able to play this part. And so, he's really leaning into it too. He really likes that he's Thor and he's really doing this. I mean, Thor is the one that has 4 movies, and it's about to have its 5th. So I think With Avengers, if you don't count, I guess Avengers technically has 4 movies, but one of them was like two. It felt like the second two were two-parters, right? But the fact that Thor is got 4 movies and is they're thinking about a 5th one for him is really interesting. And the fact too that he's still playing this part. I mean, he started playing this part in what was it? The first Thor came out in 2011. So we're now the last one just came out this earlier in 2023. So 12 years in, he's still playing the same character, and he's looking to play that character again. Actually, no. Thor: Love and Thunder came out in 2022, so 11 years later. But he's still talking about playing this character again. So it's kind of almost Fast and Furious in this, right? Like, I mean, when we get to Thor X, can we go that far? The fact that we've got so many Thors beyond, I mean, again, the thing about Thor with these movies, I wouldn't have thought that I would have been entertained by a Thor movie, and. I think that's the thing with this movie is that, like, I look at Iron Man 3 and I'm like, oh, I really like some of the character development, and I like some of the ideas and things that they're doing with it. Where this, none of that stuff seems to matter. It's, there's a scene where they're like, this like gravitational, like some kind of anomaly kind of thing in like this like back alley like warehouse kind of thing, and these kids have taken them over there, and they show them how like you can make your keys disappear and shoes and stuff disappear, and then where do they end up, we don't know. And then of course Thor and Jane stumble upon where all that stuff is, and they get zapped back to England. None of it made any, and then like there's this whole thing at the end where Natalie Portman has what looks like an Etch-a-Sketch, and she's like twisting the dials on it, and it makes people disappear. And none of it made any sense, but I was like, okay, I don't need it to make any sense. I'm watching a comic book movie, and I'm entertained enough. I mean, the other thing too is it's shy of 2 hours long, and so I think you can't stretch this kind of thing over 3 hours, but you get in hour 45, because again this movie's got like 10 minutes of credits, so it's really more like an hour and 45, an hour and 40 minutes. So 105 minutes of wackiness when you've got Hiddleston, having fun, and Hemsworth's snarkiness and doing a good job. It works enough, right? And I mean, I think the money that this one made. I was trying to think like if this was more than oh no, 'cause Thor Ragnarok made even more, right? Because Thor Ragnarok was in that window, and they just couldn't wait for more Marvel stuff, right? And I guess even Thor: Love and Thunder did better than this. So actually, this is not like some kind of anomaly that it does this well. It seems like these Thor movies that you can just at this point you can just pop these Thor movies out, and they're going to do $750 million. And so maybe that's why they want to keep making them. Maybe that's why they Chris Hemsworth wants to keep making them too, despite the fact he's been doing it for over 10 years now. He's just like, yeah, just cut me the check. I'm happy to make that money and make that happen there. So I think the thing is, again, we're 8 movies into the Marvel Cinematic Universe at this stage, and they had, we're talking about like this whole Madam Web situation, right? How ridiculous this is. They also had Morbius, which is also didn't do well and wasn't a great movie. At this stage with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there's 6 movies in, and they haven't had a Madam Web yet, right? They haven't had a Morbius yet. They haven't had an Elektra yet, or any of that kind of stuff. When they do, I mean, I guess from a financial standpoint, right? The one that happens from a flop standpoint financially, right? I guess is the Marvels, right? That's the one that hurts them. But at this stage, they are just rolling along, and there's the fact that they could make this movie and have it pull in almost $700 million, because again, it's a good enough movie, right? It's good enough, but I don't know that it's like major blockbuster $700 million. And I saw Thor Ragnarok. I saw that one on cable after it came out. I think I saw it on demand or something like that. That's also not a $750 million job, but these things, people like Thor, and so again, it kind of blows my mind because we have an Amazing Spider-Man movie comes out the next year, right? Amazing Spider-Man movie 2. It's made for $85 million more than this movie, than Thor: Dark World, and it makes not quite, like a little over $60 million more in the box office than this Thor movie does. So for $85 million less, right? This movie only makes like $60 million less. And I mean, Sony was banking everything on Amazing Spider-Man 2. I mean, this whole Madam Web thing that we talk about, right? That was supposed to be part of this whole Spider-Verse that was based off of Spider-Man. They were actually going to have the main character in there. And I think what happens is when they do Amazing Spider-Man 2, they're like, we give up. Hey, Disney, you need Spider-Man in your, it's going to be a game changer for you to have Spider-Man in your movies because he's the biggest star. We could really use the money that you're getting from that, and that it kind of changes the game completely for them. I do wonder if it's like, man, we can't beat Thor. Like, where's Spider-Man? How do we not beat Thor? And I mean, the X-Men movie, same thing. Like, they're barely pulling in more than Thor: Dark World. I think it was like $100 million more that they pulled in for Thor: Dark World, which again, it was another movie that cost more, than that next year in 2014, X-Men: Days of Future Past. It cost more to make than Thor: Dark World's $30 million more to make, and only makes $100 million more. And again, the thing with Disney, what Disney's doing here too, though, is that these Sony and Fox, they're putting out one movie a year, right? So it's the one movie a year that they need to put all their eggs in that basket. Whereas for Marvel, they're like, oh, Iron Man's going to do all the heavy lifting, and then Thor can just sneak in at the end of the year and pull in a cool $600 million. We're good to go. Because you look at the two together, right? It's $370 million total it cost for them to make those two movies, and they pulled in, $1.8 billion for those two movies. And of course, what happens, right, with Disney is that 2015, I think, is when they get Star Wars. I can't remember exactly when that is when they get Star Wars. Yeah, it's funny. I should have looked this up ahead of time because that's a big piece. But because once Disney gets Star Wars, right, then it's all over. I think it might have been actually in 2015, right? Because I think Avengers: Age of Ultron came out that same year, and actually that's right. If you look at the box office for that year, right, Force Awakens does like over $2 billion in the box office that year, and then Age of Ultron is $1.4 billion. Right? So Disney gets two of the top four. But what's funny is that Universal gets 3 of the top 5 that year because Furious 7 does better than Age of Ultron, which is again the absolute craziest thing ever. But I think at that point, right, you're seeing that combination of where Disney is starting to be the powerhouse. They're starting to kind of build that, right. I think they bought they bought Star Wars obviously before 2015, but I think at this point in 2013 they had made that purchase and they were getting ready, or maybe before that they're ready to start producing it. I probably should look that kind of thing up, but I'm knee deep in this podcast here and already going for it, so we'll see. But this movie, I guess there isn't a lot more that I can say about this movie, and maybe it's good to maybe kind of wrap it up there. But it's fascinating the movie that I don't have a lot of talking points on did as well as it did, right? That it just was. I mean, there's some other things in it, like for example, when you look at like the sort of the supporting characters that were in some of these other movies, some of the what do they call them, the Warriors 3, I think, or something like that, where you had Sif, right, played by Jamie Alexander, who I believe was at the Knicks game that I was at. I don't know if you've ever been to a New York Knicks game. Throughout the game, they'll show you the celebrities that are sitting in the in the stands. Usually they're courtside, but they'll show them, kind of like they kind of did like sometimes they'll even show like what they played, like a clip of something that they played. Like Mariska Hargitay was there, and they showed a clip of her in Law and Order, or like Jennifer Grey was there, so they showed her in Dirty Dancing. But I can't remember if Jamie Alexander, if they showed anything that she did, or if they just showed her sitting there. But yeah, her Sif character, she gets nothing. All right, like she gets barely anything. Zachary Levi, right, who ends up going on to be Shazam. He was originally supposed to play his part in the previous movie in Fandral, and then he couldn't do it because of his show, that whatever that show was, Chuck something or whatever. Remember that show that was out there? And then the guy who played it in that movie, I can't remember his name, but he was on that Once Upon a Time show, and he couldn't do the part the second time around. So Zachary Levi came in, and Zachary Levi said to Kevin Feige something along the lines of like, I don't know if I want this part because it didn't seem like those characters got a lot of run in the previous movie. And he's like, no, we're going to change that. They're going to have a bigger part now. And of course, it's even less, right? Like he does barely anything. He doesn't even look like Zachary Levi either, right? When you look at him in there. So yeah, And of course, Ray Stevenson, one of my favorites, right? He's the other one in there. Again, not a big part. Kind of at the very end, he and Jamie Alexander drop off the Infinity Stone, but we don't get much from them. Idris Elba, of course, I always love him, and it was great to see him in there. But it is interesting. I mean, there's word from the director of this movie, Alan Taylor, that there's a director's cut out there that was more close to his vision. That what we got was something that was trimmed down and messed with or something like that, which I could possibly see that. Now the question is Alan Taylor's version better than what we got here? That's one question. The other question is Alan Taylor's version something that would have played better? Because I think if you're Disney, right, or if you're Marvel, if you're the producers of this film, you're thinking you made all the right decisions because this movie pulled in a good amount of money, so you feel like you're making all the right choices here. On the other hand, I don't know if you alienated, the director, what that means. I mean, we think about this with Albert Pyun a lot, right? There's a lot of his movies where there was his version, and then there's the version that ended up being out there. And sometimes his version's better, sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes what they decided to do with it, Cyborg is an interesting one, right? Because it's like the version that we got of Cyborg is completely different from what Pyun wanted to do, but it's kind of a fun movie. It's not horrible. But then when you see like his version, it's kind of a completely different thing. The thing I love though about that was that Van Damme demanded reshoots for Cyborg, so he used the equipment of that to make Deceit. That was he was able to kind of make lemonade out of lemons with that, which it's one of my favorite ones. Why I can't think. It's one of those things where I sometimes get on here and I just can't think of it's Deceit is the name of the movie. It's got Norbert Weiser. That was the name of the movie. It came out in 1990, and he made it. Albert Pyun made it at night using the equipment that he got from when Cannon and Van Damme demanded reshoots for Cyborg. He's like, okay, I'll make that and make the movie. I think he made the movie for like $25,000 because he already had the equipment. He didn't have to worry about renting the videos and stuff like that. Shot it in 3 days using that footage there. So I always really like that kind of thing. And I mean, I think he said, Alan Taylor, that the idea of the Snyder cut inspired him to see if there was one, but he's like, I don't think Marvel's interested in that, which of course they wouldn't be. Why would they be? They made plenty of money here. And not only that, but they established Hemsworth as Thor, right, as this sort of $750 million generating machine that they can just pump out sequels to this with. But then also, established Tom Hiddleston as Loki, who is this famous, he's more popular than Thor, right? And his two TV shows are huge. People really love those. And I mean, I don't know what that means in terms of subscribers, if more people are subscribing to Disney Plus because of Tom Hiddleston's Loki. But I know for a fact that a lot of those Marvel fans that got subscriptions to Disney Plus for the Marvel stuff, they're keeping them because of Loki, right? Like those Loki shows are big enough for them. I haven't seen either of them yet, so I can't say either way. But I mean, I think, like I said when we talked about the first Thor movie, that how many people have animals named after Loki, right? I mean, so many people have dogs named Loki. It's ridiculous, but it's this Tom Hiddleston performance, and he really nails the performance here again, and just makes this character something much more fun. And so that's really kind of what this thing is establishing. And so if I'm Marvel and there's a director's cut out there that Alan Taylor says is a better version of it, I'd be looking at it as like, well, how is it better than this, right? How does it not deliver more than this? I think probably the thing that makes it better than this is probably more coherent, right? It makes more sense. But again, sometimes you just get to that point where you're just like, I'm watching a comic book movie. I don't really care if any of this stuff makes any sense. Just Thor, use your hammer and bash the baddies, and let's get on with it, and end the movie and call it good. And I think that's kind of what this movie delivers for us. And again, I think that's another piece too. Is again, if there's a director's cut of this that is either longer, has more plot, exposition, or whatever, right? The fact that Marvel looked at it, and Kevin Feige and whoever else involved looked at it and said, hey, we got to change this. Just the same way that they trimmed Iron Man 3 down from 3 hours and 10 minutes to 2 hours and 10 minutes. They did what they could to when you think of Thor, right? I mean, it's thinking from a baseball standpoint, it's the fastball of it, where it's just like, just throw a fastball. Like we're at it. I guess the best way to think of it is like in baseball when, and I don't know how many people out there are listening to this. I know I have listeners from all over the world. So I don't know how many of you are baseball fans. Baseball's a fun sport. You might want to get into it. But anyway, in baseball, when you're ahead by a lot of runs, right? So you're up by maybe you're up by 5 or 6 runs, and you're playing into the later innings. The goal is to just get the other team to make outs. And so the goal for the pitcher is to just throw a fastball and throw it over the plate. And if the other team hits it, if they hit a home run, it's not a big deal because it's only 1 run against 5, So that's the goal. What you don't want to do is walk a batter, right? And by walking a batter, it means you throw the ball 4 times and it doesn't make a strike. And so the player gets first base automatically. And you do that a couple times, and suddenly now you've got 3 or 4 guys on base, and now you hit a home run, and suddenly the game's tied. And that's kind of what this movie was. It's like, you're way ahead, Marvel, right? You're way ahead at this point. You're in the later innings. There's no point in getting cute with it, right? Don't get cute. Just throw the fastball and get these guys out, and that's what they do. Maybe they give up a couple runs in this game, but ultimately they win the game. And I think sometimes when you think of like director's cuts or not, or however, sometimes the studio is right on that. And I think in this case they probably are. But it'd be kind of fun to see what Alan Taylor's version of it looks like, just to see it, like just to see a version of it and watch it and see what it's like. Even if it doesn't fit in the canon, or it does changes or does things with this that you wouldn't expect. I think it still would be kind of fun to see what it is. All right, I think we've kind of covered this one enough. So why don't we wrap here, and in 2 weeks we'll come back and we will look at Captain America Winter Soldier. And we will also look at Guardians of the Galaxy. First time kind of introducing them into this Marvel Cinematic Universe, so that should be fun. The other film, of course, that I'm going to watch in that time period, 2 others, right, that I'll be watching in that time period, and probably we'll discuss a little bit on here, going to be The Amazing Spider-Man Part 2, which I haven't seen before. I did see Part 1, but I haven't seen Part 2, so I'll try to watch that in here. That one is also on Disney+, which is good. And also X-Men Days of Future Past, which I don't know if that's on Disney+. I think it might be on HBO Max, but I have both. Again, one I haven't seen before, so I think it'll be kind of cool to watch them in the context of these 2 Marvel Cinematic Universe movies that we'll be looking at. But yeah, as we wrap this up, again, DTV Connoisseur .blogspot.com. That's where you can find links to everything. You find links to the books, find links to the podcast. Everything is there. The best thing to do probably is to page down if you're looking on a mobile device. Page down to where it says View Web Version. That'll give you all the sidebar links to everything there. It might be a lot. You might get freaked out at first, but it gives you all the sidebar links. Also the archive. We're getting close to getting that thing up to date, but hopefully we'll have that soon. But yeah, and then in the novels, Don's House in the Mountains. I think that's one. You can pick that one up on Amazon in Kindle or paperback. Bainbridge, my short action novel, same thing, Kindle or paperback. Of course, my novel, Holtman Arms. So we were talking about Dakota Johnson being in 50 Shades of Grey, and Holtman Arms. That's this character Colvin Hall, who's a romance author. He writes romance novels, and he writes under the pen name Mary Ballantyne, so nobody knows it's him, and he has to he stays in this kind of cheaper apartment building, Holtman Arms, because he has to downplay his wealth, so no one will think that he is this famous writer. He can't just be spending all this money like that. But anyway, the publisher, he has this publisher named Lance Rockford, who I named after the Dolph character in The Defenders. Lance Rockford, went with the same name there. But anyway, Lance Rockford tells him that he wants more 50 Shades of Grey because that's what the market is pulling for. So he does more kind of that kind of thing in his romance novels. But one of the things that happens is he encounters 2 different women who have their own kind of non-consensual bondage. I guess you wouldn't call it bondage if it's not consensual, but non-consensual situations that pop up. And he almost faces this dilemma where he's like, he wants to use their what happened to them in his stories, and then decides not to. But he almost, because he has the thought, he feels really guilty about it. But that's one of the kind of the stories that comes up, is he kind of the novels that he's writing, these romance novels, have become these huge successes, and by leading on the 50 Shades of Grey thing, they become even bigger, and people are just buying them off the shelves, and it hits a breaking point as the book goes on, because he's becoming so popular. he sees his books everywhere, but they're not his books, right? They're Mary Ballantyne's books, and it starts to really get to him. He's drinking a lot, that kind of thing. But it's interesting because we're talking about Dakota Johnson and Madam Web here, and there's a little bit of that overlap there. So yeah, Holtman Arms, another one you can get. It's my my third novel that I published, and it's on Amazon Kindles, just like all the other ones. Has a new cover. I put an image of of an apartment building on the cover there. Just I think John said it looks kind of almost like Wes Anderson-ish, but I really dig it. It's very simple, very simplistic, I guess you could say. But definitely one to check out for sure. And of course, if you're a Stephen King fan, it's I went to school at the University of Maine as well as him, and I named all of the characters that have chapters after dorms at the University of Maine. So the main character, Colvin Hall, he's named after the dorm that I lived in freshman year. And then the romance novels are based off a character named Brock Gannett, and Gannett Hall is the dorm that Stephen King stayed at. I had a friend who lived in Gannett Hall my freshman year, and I actually played on their intramural hockey team, floor hockey team. So there's and Mary Ballantyne, even the pen name Ballantyne Hall was the women's only dorm at the University of Maine. So, and then you have like all the other characters. They have a last name that's usually based off one of, or it's always based off of one of the dorms that you made. So yeah, so kind of that connection there. I don't know if it's a Stephen King connection, but if you're a fan of Stephen King, you kind of know of UMaine. That was my alma mater as well, and so I got to incorporate that. Even though the main character, Colvin Hall, he actually went to UNH. So that's kind of the twist there, is that he went to UNH, but I named all the characters after UMaine dorms. But yeah, so definitely always appreciate when people check out the novels. And of course, if you do buy any, by all means, let me know. I'm happy to shout you out on the main podcast. So we'll wrap this up. But thank you everybody for listening, and we'll talk again soon. Bye everyone.